Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sam Yebri. I'm an attorney and a community activist. It is my pleasure to moderate this evening's program on behalf of the Iranian American Jewish Federation. Before we begin, we must acknowledge the important work of the Iranian American Jewish Federation, especially its emergency fund, who are helping so many people during this difficult time. I also want to thank those who conceived of this program and helped organize it, including Susan Azizadeh, Eli Shmerni, Ashley Beruchim, and Elahe Beruchim. I encourage you to visit IAJF.org to learn more about the organization and consider financially supporting its work. The topic this evening, coping with coronavirus, cannot be more timely, and we could not have assembled a more illustrious panel of speakers. Rabbi David Wolpe is the senior rabbi of Sinai Temple. He's been named one of the most influential people in Los Angeles, the most influential rabbi in America by Newsweek, and one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. He's a prolific teacher, author, and commentator, and a great friend to the Iranian American Jewish community. Dr. Afshin Emrani is a graduate of UCLA and UCSD Medical School. He has practiced internal medicine and cardiology for more than 20 years, and has also worked in the ER and ICU for more than 15 years. He's also become one of the leading thinkers and advocates in the entire Iranian American Jewish community in Los Angeles and across the world. Finally, Dr. Minou Michlin earned her doctorate of social welfare from Yeshiva University and has been a licensed clinical social worker and professor for more than 30 years. In her private psychotherapy practice, her specialty is working with children and families, as well as people with physical and developmental disabilities. Thank you all for joining us. I'll begin by asking a few questions, and of course, we'll leave time for questions from our viewers at the end. I ask everyone to pose their questions into the chat function. There's a Q&A button at the very bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type those in, and we will moderate those and ask those at the end of the program. And I do need to note that the views presented today do not necessarily represent the views of the Iranian American Jewish Federation or any of the panelists. So now, to begin, I wanted to ground the conversation and really root it in the personal. I want to ask each of you the same opening question. How are you handling 2020? What's been the hardest aspect of the pandemic for you and your family, and what's helping you through it personally? Let's start with Rabbi Wolpe.
Thank you for the invitation to be here. So in some ways, the pandemic has not been difficult in the sense that I tend to be a homebody. I do a lot of reading and a lot of writing, and it's not like I live my life in clubs and bars, so I don't miss not going to them. There is that part of it, which is that if you are self-contained and self-sufficient, the pandemic permits that. The part that's been difficult for me is that what I do is to relate to congregants and people and to do life cycle events and bar and bat mitzvahs and Shabbat services and see people and visit hospitals, and that's all been made almost impossible. There are some accommodations that we can make here or there, but that's very difficult because I'm part of a tradition that loves and believes in community, and the pandemic is the antithesis of community. So as an individual, it's been okay for me because I have this streak of sitting alone and reading. But as somebody who's a rabbi and loves the community and likes to be out among people and see them and engage with them and pray with them and speak to them and be spoken to and hear problems face to face, that's been really both difficult and profoundly sad.
Thank you. Dr. Emrani, how about you?
Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. I think I would say that the difficulty for me personally is twofold. One is the interruption of routines. And the second thing is the lack of human touch. And at the beginning of this pandemic, I felt like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. I'm sure many other people felt that way. I felt like my routines were taken out of my hands and they were replaced by routines that I did not recognize. And I had built an entire life of feeling like I had some level of success based on routine. So what do I do when I wake up? What time do I wake up? When do I exercise? When do I work? You know, things such as Shabbat, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, all these routines are broken for me, and for my community, for my family, for everyone. As a father, I worry about my children's routine. As a son, I worry about my parents' health. As a physician that manages thousands of lives, I worry about my patients and what's happening with them. And I feel like you know, a lot of times for me, I'm a hugger, I'm a toucher. I'm someone that likes to kiss people and tell them I love them and hug them. And that's something that's really, really gone missing also. Initially, even with my immediate family, I was worried to even kiss my children because I was going to work and then coming home. So those kind of things, those two aspects have been very, very difficult for me. And the way that I've learned to cope is basically by setting up routines again. So what time do I wake up? When do I go to work? What do I do? When do I eat? How do I exercise? When do I meditate? When do I pray? You know, writing, sleeping, all those routines, I started resetting them, and those routines have helped tremendously in coping with the difficulties.
Thank you. Dr. Michlin, how are you coping?
Well, we are just the two of us, and we are retired. So I thought that it wouldn't be difficult for us to be homebound, but very quickly I found out that we each had our own routine. Even though we were retired, I do a lot of volunteer work and other social activities, and my husband had his own. And suddenly the two of us had to spend all day together. And that was a new experience after over 48 years of marriage. And it created a lot of tension between us because we were both anxious, but we were taking it out on each other. And for reality, I probably hadn't been as angry at him in the first 3 weeks that I had been in the first 48 years. And then I became aware that my anger was coming from frustrations and fear and anxiety of pandemic, and I was taking it out on him. And once I had that light went on in my head, it changed our relationship. And then we started to have our own new routines and to be able to give each other space and to be able to do our own activities. But I really miss not being able to do my volunteer work. I was doing a lot of home visits. I was doing a lot of committee meetings, a lot of in-person things that I cannot do now. And the other thing that has been very, very difficult is that my children and their families are in East Coast, and we always spend Passover, Thanksgiving, summer together. And I haven't seen them since last Thanksgiving in person. So we had to create routines of celebrating Shabbat on Zoom, celebrating Passover on Zoom, celebrating birthdays, and creating some activities that we could interact on Zoom with fun and celebration. And that has been very, very difficult for me.
I think that's been hard for everyone. So, Rabbi Wolpe, Jews are no strangers to adversity and crises. We just commemorated Tisha B'Av, which felt almost redundant this year, and Shabbat Nachamu, the Shabbat of comfort and consolation. So what does our Jewish tradition teach us about a crisis? What strength can we draw from our faith and from our traditions during this crisis?
One of the things that Judaism has done in crises is it has invented new things along the lines of what Dr. Emrani was saying in terms of new routines, in the sense that, for example, there is a story in the Talmud that the rabbis were not supposed to blow the shofar outside the confines of Jerusalem, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established that you could then start to blow the shofar outside of Jerusalem. The story is interesting in itself, but the point is that synagogues, the shofar, once the temple was destroyed, all these things were developed in ways that they hadn't been before. And I think that all of us have discovered that we create out of the necessity of the lives that we're living new ways of being. Some of them are trivial in action, although not trivial in spirit. I've told the story before that I was steaming vegetables one day, which is not something that I was generally accustomed to doing before the pandemic. And my daughter walked into the kitchen and she took one look at her father steaming vegetables, which is a sight I don't believe she'd ever seen before. And she said, "I'm loving Apocalypse Dad." And there is that sense of we can do new things because of the conditions. And Judaism again and again showed its ability to adapt based on the conditions that it was in. We learned languages for whatever country we were in. We created new businesses depending on the economies of the countries we were in. And that adaptability is one facet of the Jewish tradition. Allied to that is the innovation, the fact that you accept the reality of what is, and you try to change the reality that you can change. And so I go on early morning walks, for example, and I see people around the neighborhood going on these walks, and I know that that's their opportunity to get out during the day, and that all those sorts of small innovations that we create, Judaism teaches us are important and possible. Underlying it all is the recognition that God's world contains everything, good and bad, light and dark, joy and pain. And you don't get out of this world without both. And so we are right now going through a very painful time. And yet, for most of us, there is still an enormous amount to be grateful for. So we acknowledge the pain. We try to adjust our lives as best we can. But we remember that if we have people who love us, and if we are healthy, and if we have food, we have much more to be grateful for than to be sorrowful about. And that attitude, that of gratitude is, I think, the deepest religious emotion, and one that we ought to feel even in the midst of the difficulty. Remember that the Psalm says, "I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." You've got to keep moving.
That's a beautiful perspective. Well, Dr. Emrani, to build off of that, you know our community really well as a physician, as a leader, as a social media figure that is commenting on various issues. When it comes to COVID-19, how is our community doing? Especially when now we're hearing reports of the return of mid-size and large weddings. What's your reaction, and what can we do? What can we do better?
I don't have any stats realistically about the community. Most of what I can tell you is anecdotally from my practice and from what people share with me. So I think that there are two groups of people that I am concerned about. One group is the part of the community that is totally scared of this virus and is stuck and doing nothing, not living their lives. And the other side is the other extreme, which is people who are careless. And I think that, you know, for the most part, all of us fall somewhere in the middle, and we all make mistakes because there's the information out there is definitely confusing. And I think at the outset, I'd like to say something that is very, very important, that we all need to be very humble when it comes to this virus. Because the truth is that even though there are many talking heads and scientists and doctors and epidemiologists and virologists and all these terms that we never talked about before that are, and we all think that we're all experts, the truth is that the virus is going to do what it's going to do, and we're not going to know everything about it until 2 years from now, looking back. So most of what we're talking about are predictions, and most of us end up being wrong more often than not. Having said that, I think that there are two groups of people that I mentioned. There are people that are stuck, so fearful of this virus, that are not there. And what I'm seeing is, especially in the midlife to older age group, that They are becoming deconditioned because they're not walking. There are people that actually haven't left their house. I had a person that came to my office today for the first time, and they said, Dr. Emrani, this is the very first time I've left my house. So there is, you know, they're not exercising, they're not really using their muscles, they're sitting on a couch watching TV, stuck to the news, and they're developing muscle weakness, depression, there's anger. I'm talking to families about difficult issues such as domestic abuse and suicidal ideations and that kind of thing, which a lot of it comes from being stuck. You know, like Rabbi Wolpe just said, you know, we're supposed to move. And a lot of our tradition teaches us that we have to move and we have to go through our fear and get past. And that also is confirmed by medicine. So we need to get up and exercise. We need to have proper routines of sleeping and waking and getting out of the house. On the other hand, there are people that I'm seeing that are careless, and not too long ago I was talking to a person who ended up in the ICU on a ventilator. Unfortunately, they could have been avoided because the person was being careless, and they are basically thinking that this virus is either not real or it's a hoax, or that it's just, you know, just nothing more than a simple virus that it just goes through. And so there is that extreme of it also. My recommendation is not to treat the pandemic and the virus based on political views. It's so easy these days to just take sides of one side of the political field versus the other and decide that that's how you're going to live your life. And I think that the virus really doesn't care what party you're from. It cares if you are vulnerable or not. And I think the people who are vulnerable, and there are criteria that we know now about, such as people who are over the age of 70, such as people who are morbidly obese. So if the body mass index goes over 30, 35, for every point, the risk gets significantly higher. People of certain ethnicities, such as African Americans, and people who have low vitamin D levels and vitamin D deficiencies, and people who are on multiple medications for many reasons, so blood pressure, cholesterol, heart disease. The more medical problems, the higher the risk becomes. So people who are vulnerable really need to take this seriously and consider it a potentially deadly virus. But the rest of us also need to protect them. So we also need to keep ourselves healthy, and we need to keep them healthy. So we need to remind them of what to do, and we need to wear the mask. The mask is not a political statement. It says to the person in front of us that I love you and I'm here to take care of you. And it also does something for yourself, even though there was a lot of issues with the initial information that came out that said maybe masks don't help and that kind of thing. We now know that masks help. They don't decrease your oxygen level. They don't cause any harm. I mean, as surgeons and medical doctors, we can wear them for 10 hours in the OR and continue operating without any decline in mental status or decline in physical status. So we should all wear masks and protect each other until we're through this pandemic. We should encourage our loved ones to get out and go in the sun and walk. There's nothing wrong with being outdoors and walking. And if you're going to be in a crowded area that there are other people, then you should wear a mask. But if you're in an area where you're by yourself, let's say you're on a mountaintop walking and there's nobody around, there is no reason you have to wear a mask. Make sure you're getting plenty of sleep. So 8 hours of sleep, that boosts your immune system. Make sure that if it's okay with your doctor to take your vitamin D3, about 5,000 international units. And eating healthy foods, so avoiding sugar, processed foods, and keeping your weight down. The weight is really, really becoming a major issue. So that again goes into the fact that you need to walk and keep the weight down. those are my recommendations.
Right. So I want to drill down on the mental health component of this and ask Dr. Michlin. This pandemic has taken a deep toll on all of us emotionally, on our mental health, on our families. What are some of the most common issues that you're hearing? What are some coping mechanisms and tactics that you're suggesting? And also, are these permanent and long-term, or are things going to get better for us emotionally with our mental health?
I think it's both mental health and social family issues. And some of it the doctor mentioned, but it's very important, but it has effect the families that are having difficulty and under financial and emotional and social pressures. This pandemic is causing far greater damage. Just like we talk about medical vulnerability, they have social vulnerability. So the pandemic and limitations are far more difficult for them. When 3 generations are living in one small apartment, to the tension and the difficulties and the clarity of role and expectations is far more difficult than a nuclear family that lives in has a front yard, has a opportunity for children to go out and play and do things, compared to those who are living in small apartments. So there is social, economical, and mental health vulnerability that many of the families are experiencing. If we take the average family that is not in the extreme situation, is that the family members need to be clear about their expectation and how this pandemic has affected them. Parents are carrying multiple roles now, and that is creating tension. The way to cope with the fact that now we have to work out of the house, do the home teaching of the children, to be respectful of our spouse, to worry about our parents, elderly parents who are closed in their apartments, that we have to deliver their groceries, leave it behind their door and hope that they would get it and are able to take care of themselves. These all create anxiety and tension for the adults in the family. And children pick up parents' anxieties. The best way parents can deal with the children's anxiety is to first manage their own anxiety. And there is a whole range of suggestions for parents to handle their own anxiety in this stay-home situation. Going for a walk is one of the best ones. Meditation, mindfulness, having activities such as playing games with the children, having difficult puzzles that the whole family sits around the table and solves the jigsaw puzzles that for years nobody was paying attention to, or playing card games, or a variety of games that 40 years ago was common for children and now it's all on the screen. Having those are becoming very popular. Having clear expectations from children, it's very important, as Doctor was mentioning, is that to have a routine, to have a schedule. If a parents at nights ask their children, what would you like to do tomorrow? And for themselves to make a list of activities. It doesn't have to be an earth-shaking activity. It could be what exercise they want to do, who's going to prepare the meals, what kind of meals they want, who do they want to talk to, how much time they are allowed to be on the screen, how much time they're expected to do activities together. For family to allow and respect, for every member of the family has to have certain amount of time to themselves, and that everybody needs to respect that, whether it's just a couple or number of children in the family, that if the youngest is taking a nap, that is the mother's time to have time by herself and others not to disturb them. It's time to teach the family members to respect each other's boundaries and each other's abilities and what we can do and what we need help to. The other thing that helps a lot with the children and even with adults is teaching them and helping them to be useful to other members of the family and other members of the community. For example, last week, the Hillel school, but the elementary school children were delivering challah to the elders in the community. And what a great feeling for a 12-year-old to feel that on Friday afternoon, she's taking a challah and knocking at the door and saying Shabbat Shalom. It sounds like a small activity, but the respect that that child feels and the energy that they gets helps them to cope with the anxiety. One of the strong recommendations I make is that the world is unpredictable and full of unknown and anxiety. We need to create routine and security at home so that the children feel that there is predictability. They know that the mother is up at 8 o'clock and the breakfast is at the table at 8:30, and who is going to put the breakfast there, and every day it is the same. That we have a bedtime and that is predictable and we all go to bed. We have a game time and that's predictable. Those kind of predictability gives some inner peace to the child so that they don't get overwhelmed with the unknown and the anxiety that continuously being bombarded with, and we don't know. Even as parents, nobody knows what tomorrow is. So we have to live today, and giving security and boundaries and clarity to children and to ourselves helps us to deal with that.
Thank you. I have a few follow-up questions that they're from the Q&A, and also they're on my mind as a father of young children. So a few of them. One is, how do we talk to young children about the pandemic? What is safe to tell them, and how do we answer their questions? There's a question about, what about children who are developing anxiety or sleeplessness and are worrying about the pandemic? How do we talk to them about it? And there's also a question about homeschooling. Are we damaging our children, and what can we do to mitigate some of those effects? So Dr. Michlin.
Okay. You gave me a list of questions, and you think at my age I have to remember the order.
So first, how do we talk about the pandemic, children's anxiety, sleeplessness?
I think your first question was, how much do we tell children about epidemic and the virus and the illnesses? I think that we have to take a couple of variables into account in how we respond. The age of the child. The younger child, like if it's a 2-year-old, all they need to know is that you teach them about the safety of touch. That now, and you role model for them is that because of the epidemic, and they can learn the word, but they don't know the meaning of it, but it's a word that they can hold on to, is that we don't kiss and hug nobody other than mommy and daddy and brothers and sisters who are in the same immediate breathing space. But to know that now they can wave hello and throw a kiss to grandma and to aunties and friends and in the community, and to say out loud, I love you. That is for a 2- and 3-year-old. The 5-6-year-olds, you need to find out what is their understanding and what their worries is, not to give them too much information. They need to know the safety practices, and they need to know that you're going to take care of them. Too much information is not going to help them. It's just, first of all, you need to know what they understand. Sometimes we give them a lot of information and it goes over their head. We have to know, what do they understand? What if a 6-year-old says, I'm scared of pandemic, I'm scared of 19, you have to be able to say, what do you think pandemic is? Hear them, let them tell you what they think and what they know, and then just give them enough information so that they stay safe and they feel secure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Any thoughts on homeschooling and Zooming and how that's affecting children?
Right. I interviewed quite a few elementary school children, specifically a few months ago for another project. And what was interesting is that students who are bright and quick in learning, they said they loved Zoom because they can do their schoolwork, get it over with, and not to wait for other kids in the class to catch up. So then I have more time to do my own projects. This is what the smart kid said. The kid who's borderline and limited, when I asked that cohort of students. They said that they liked it because they can go with their own speed and their mommy helps them when they get stuck. It's the middle group that is having a harder time because they're missing their friends and they're missing support of the teachers. And that's when the role of the parents come in. In general, I think that a lot of the reality is that Zooming is not as good as going to school. And a lot of parents, excuse me, I just have to have a sip of water, my throat is dry. Persian tea, not water. A lot of parents are worried about my children falling behind. That's especially professional parents who have all their life have run fast to get to the top of the line, are worried that their children are falling behind. My question from them is, falling behind who? Everybody is in the same boat, so there is nobody who's going ahead. So the whole world is stuck home Zooming with schooling, if they are lucky enough to have the equipment for Zooming and their support at home for doing problem solving with Zooming. And I also would give example of when Iranian Revolution happened, a lot of school-age children and high school young people were stuck in Austria for 2-3 years with no schooling. Maybe some local schooling that was not helpful for them for when they came to United States. And they had to start all new language, new schooling, and missing 3 years or 2 years of schooling. And for comfort of those parents, 2 of those students who had been in Austria alone, both of them were sent by their parents at the age 12 to Austria so that they come to United States. One of them ended up at Harvard Medical School and the other one at MIT Engineering School. So I don't think that a little interruption, I myself missed 7 months of schooling for medical reasons. I'd gone to Israel for orthopedic surgery. And in my 6th grade, I only went to school 2 months. And in 8th grade, I only went to school for 4 months. My grades at the finals were lower than the previous year or the following year, but I finished the year and I never fell behind and I continued on my education. So I know personally that interruption doesn't end education.
Right. So that gives us hope. Wonderful. I want to transition back to Rabbi Wolpe. Earlier, we asked, what can Judaism do for us during this crisis? My question now is, what can we do for Judaism, for the Jewish community, to help Jewish Los Angeles come out of this crisis stronger?
Well, that's what we call a lob. You teed that up very nicely. Look, the most important thing that you can do, and this will surprise no one, the 2 most important things, I would say they're equally important. One is to continue to maintain Jewish traditions in your home for your children. This is part of the routine that Dr. Michlin spoke about just a moment ago. And the second is to continue to support and belong to synagogues and to Jewish institutions. And that's because there's going to be a real economic reckoning among the Jewish institutions throughout the country. And you don't know most of the people, in fact, all of the people that we're speaking to, don't know what American Jewish life is without the synagogue as a convener and organizer. And the truth is that Jewish schools and Jewish support and a Jewish voice in the city, all of those things come not only from the organizations that are important to support, but from the synagogues. So I hope very much that people don't think that you can take a year out. Remember that your kids see this and they say, oh, well, when things get tough, what you can drop is your Jewish commitment. I think that that's a terrible lesson to give to children, and they won't forget it. it's also a terrible lesson for yourself, because the truth is that we need our community and we need our synagogues more than ever. And so I am hopeful that the Los Angeles Jewish community will come through this both affiliated and strong.
Your colleague, Rabbi Guzik, had a great article about doubling down this year in the
Yes, she
holidays.
did, in the Jewish Journal, and I hope you read it.
You should check it out, jewishjournal.com, Rabbi Nicole Guzik of Sinai Temple, about doubling down this year, doubling your tzedakah, doubling down your commitment to your synagogue, your school, whatever denomination, because they need it now. They've been there for us, especially for our Persian Jewish community for when we came here for the last 40 years. They've been there for us, and now is our time to repay that debt at this crisis moment. There is a question, Rabbi Wolpe, about high holidays. What is Sinai Temple and what will synagogues be doing? And then there's another question about what about our more elderly family members in general, and specifically high holidays? This is very, very important to them. How do we navigate this?
Well, I mean, the conservative and reform synagogues will be having services online. Sinai Temple services will be online. Some of it will be only for members. Some of it will be for the general community. And we've been working very hard to create a service online that will be meaningful and beautiful. Older people especially won't be able to gather. We're working now on whether we can gather outside, in what ways for bar mitzvah. We get different directives from the city almost every week. But it's going to be extremely difficult for the people who won't go online. And the Orthodox synagogues. And there, I think what will probably happen is that people will gather in very small groups, whether in the synagogue or in their homes, and do the best they can. For those of you who are able to join online, I think there'll be an unusual, but I hope a meaningful experience where we do our minyan every morning and every afternoon online, and people join not only from Los Angeles, but from all over the world. And so this may mark a shift in some sense, in that our congregation now becomes a worldwide congregation. But it's going to be a challenge. There is not a solution to the reality that there's a pandemic. You can't say to an older person, look, because you care so much about high holidays, we're going to gather with other people. You just can't do it. And so this year, we're going to have a difficult high holidays and a different high holidays.
I can imagine it's been very difficult for everyone, and as a rabbi, as clergy, it's especially challenging, I'm sure. So
We have been working hard.
Yeah, we know you are. So I'm going to ask Dr. Emrani one question, then we'll go to the Q&A. We have a lot of questions. So Dr. Emrani, there's an old joke, baseball player Yogi Berra used to say, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. And you said earlier how hard it is for you to pontificate about the future. But I'm going to ask you to what do the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months look like? What are some of the key benchmarks? Tell us what you think about schools opening and what we can possibly predict. And then I have some other medical questions that we'll ask you too, but let's start with that.
Are you asking me what stocks to buy?
If you have tips, take that too.
So, like I said, I think that almost everybody that tries to understand and predict and describe this virus will be wrong at some point, and we will really know the truth 2 years from now. Having said that, as you know, I was one of the first crazy voices in the community that warned everybody about canceling parties, closing temples, that businesses were going to close, and I was attacked on a continuous basis, walking down the street by people that were worried that I was going to cancel their bar mitzvahs coming up, and unfortunately, here we are. My daughter, believe it or not, was studying in Israel, a study abroad program, and I was fighting with the school to bring her back because I knew that the borders in Israel were going to be closed, and everybody laughed at me saying that there is no way that's ever going to happen. And of course, I brought her back, but the rest of the class had to be brought back by some sort of a rescue mission. So having said that, I want to give you first the bad news of what I think is going to happen. And these are my personal opinions, and some of them are going to be shocking for people. And I'm gonna end up with good news because that's the way I like to think. The bad news for me is that I think that the virus will not be eradicated, and we will live with this virus for the future. I think that the virus is widespread, and it will become part of our new reality, and it will be a background noise. I think that we will have a vaccine, but the vaccine will not be perfect, but it will be good enough vaccine. And also remember that we have flu vaccines every year that maybe 40–50% of my patients refuse to take. And I think that many won't take this vaccine when it's ready and it comes out for many different reasons, which we can get into. The other part is that I think that the next few weeks will be extremely challenging, and I'd like everybody to please be careful. We are going to go through a difficult time in Los Angeles and California. We are now, if you look at the number of deaths, we were down to 300 in the US, and now we're over 1,000. And it's very possible that for the next 2–3 months, we're going to have 1,000 deaths a day again. And the way that it worked is that the initial curve, so-called curve, was a New York curve mostly. And we're calling this a second curve. It's not a second curve. It's actually part of the same curve. It's just that now New York is calmed down, and we are now seeing the curve go up in California, Florida, Arizona, and so on and so forth. So we are part of this upcoming curve. I'm seeing now the first time where New York, there were sick people, I didn't see one sick patient. Now I'm treating a handful every single day, and I know that the numbers are going up. But what we need to know is that we need to wear our masks, and we need to do all the social distance. I mean, physical distancing. I don't like to call it social distancing, and being careful not to get the virus and not to give the virus to other people. So that's the bad news portion. The good news portion is that if you remember, we started with a mortality rate of 5 to 10%. So 1 in 10 people that got it were going to die and end up in the emergency room. And we were told that 2 to 4 million people would end up dying of this virus in the United States. Thank God those numbers are wrong, and our infection mortality rate is closer to about 0.3 to 0.5, which is only maybe 3 times or 5 times a flu, which I say only because it's not anywhere near what we were told at the beginning. An average flu season kills about 50,000 people, so you could expect an upper limit of 250,000 people with this. I think as of today, if I'm not mistaken, we're around 160,000. So we have a number to go, and as I said, we may have several weeks of 1,000 deaths a day until we get through this. Now, the second part of the good news is that I think that once every region, such as California, or that's where we are located, but other parts of the country too, go through the New York-like curve, that once the curve comes down, that I think that we become what people hate to term, and it's sort of like not a politically incorrect thing to say, but we get to herd immunity. The reason I say that is that when we started this, and when I started making the predictions that things were going to get bad and think that our businesses and our society had to close, was because of places such as Italy. And now we are going back and looking at Italy and New York and places such as those that have been hit hard and have gone through their hardship. And we are seeing that the numbers have dropped significantly, that the death rate has gone down significantly, and that even though people get sick, very, very few people die. So the question that has interested me from the very beginning of this is why is it that children below the age of 15, certain, below age of 20, 15, get the virus, but they don't get sick. And the fascinating thing is that the children have this gland called the thymus gland, which produces T cells, which is a important part of the immune system that has been neglected in much of what we've talked about in the news. Most of what the news and you read about are antibodies. Antibodies are related to the part of the immune system called B cells. All the focus has been on antibodies. That's why people are freaking out that the antibodies are going away, so they're going to get reinfection and things are going to come back. So children have these T cells that are very healthy, and the T cells are learning from the cold viruses or the coronaviruses that they get routinely in daycare centers or in school. And the children their T cells attack this new novel coronavirus and get rid of it. And I think that we're seeing that now happening in adults, and I've posted a few articles that this is true. And so we have T cell immunity, and I think that between the T cell immunity and the B cell immunity, we are going to reach the herd immunity much faster. And the most controversial thing that I keep claiming is that I believe that we will reach herd immunity faster than we will have a vaccine. I think that the vaccine is necessary, and I'm glad that they're working on it. But I think that by the end of this year, certainly in 2020, I think that coronavirus is going to be behind us. 2021, coronavirus is going to be behind us, and we're not going to worry about that. And I hope that this prediction also comes true. The last thing I want to say is that out of the 4,100 COVID-19 patients that were in the ICU at the peak of Italy, there are now only 38 people in all of ICUs in Italy. And there in New York also, there were over 44,000 people in ICUs. Now the entire area has less than 100 people. So this is showing that that not only the treatment has gotten better, but now once you go through that curve, that you develop a herd immunity, and hopefully we'll have the novel coronavirus COVID-19 behind us by the end of this year.
Thank you. That was very informative. We're going to come back with, we have a lot of medical questions, including about testing. I want to ask Rabbi Wolpe a question. I'm going to combine a few questions from our viewers about how to navigate misinformation, politics, conspiracy theories, non-science-based responses towards this pandemic. Any advice, Rabbi Wolpe?
Oh, sure, it's easy. Here's what I would say. First of all, presumptively, a conspiracy theory is wrong. Because remember that in order for a conspiracy theory to be right, not only must you assume that this secret cabal of whatever it is doing things, but also you must presume that people can keep a secret, which in my experience is almost never true. And just imagine how many people have to keep a secret for this conspiracy to actually work, and keep a secret for a long time, right? Not just for a day or for a week. Like all the Jews have kept the secret that we run the world for years and years and years and years. Just think of how foolish that is. And second, because a conspiracy theory appeals to the idea that something can be explained simply by evil intention. And that is rarely the way things come about. It's usually a lot of circumstance and happenstance and accident and all of that. So that's the first thing, is that conspiracy theories are really rarely the way we envision them. But also what I would say is you have to try, to the extent that you can, to listen to information that disagrees with your preconceptions. That's the key. And to allow that information in, not to filter it out. In my own experience, it's very hard to get people, what they will say is, yeah, okay, but what about this? Which is a way of dismissing the information that doesn't accord with your preconception. We have very powerful confirmation bias. And so we don't like to hear things that we don't like to hear. So to the extent that it is possible, try to listen to voices that are reasoned, that are not angry, that don't insist that the other side is always wrong about everything, or that there's a secret cabal that is trying to create evil things, because Jews have been the subject of such conspiracy theories for a long time. And also recognize that whatever you believe, there is some truth in the opposite to what you believe as well. And that's against our nature, but really important. It's one of the reasons why the Talmud contains opposition arguments. Why does the Talmud contain arguments that ultimately didn't prevail? Because those arguments have merit too, and they have worth too, and tomorrow they may prove to be true. I always ask people, just think of things you used to believe that you don't. So why is it that you think everything you believe today, you'll believe forever and ever? We're all fallible. We all have bad filters. So as long as you are only adhering to a single point of view and not allowing contrary point of views to make any dent in your worldview, you're going to be wrong about some stuff. Try to be as flexible in mind as you wish you were in body. Do stretches of the mind like you do stretches of the limbs. And if you don't do stretches of the limbs, then start doing those too. That's my advice.
That's great advice. And I think we can apply that to the next few months before this election as well, as to, I think that's good advice. Dr. Emrani, going back to you, I'm going to ask for rapid answers to some of these medical questions. What's the accuracy of the rapid tests versus private tests versus the city and county ones? Is there a difference? And what is your view of testing? When should you get tested? And there's a question, what's the point if there's a view that doesn't affect the treatment? So a lot of questions about testing.
Wow, rapid tests. This is you can write a textbook on this question. First of all, testing is really, really troublesome in every country, and it is here in the United States. If you get sick today and you want to wait 5 days and go get tested, if you get exposed today and you want to wait 5 days to go get tested, it might take you, depending on the center that you go to, somewhere between 7 to 14 days to get the results back. Everybody's backlogged. We have patients that come in for testing that need to have surgery, that we need to know if they have COVID before they go for surgery, and the surgery is in 3 days, but the test result comes back in 7 to 10 days. There are tests that are very accurate, such as the PCR that's run by such credible labs like Quest or LabCorp. They are over 95% accurate. But there are other tests, but they take time because they're busy, and these are nasal tests where you take a probe and you push it up your nose, and it's very it depends on the operator that's doing it. There are other tests that are like throwing a coin. So there are pinprick tests that, for example, you can go to a center. They say, "Oh, let me do like you check your sugar, a finger stick test." And that test can be only 50% accurate, so might as well have a coin toss. Most of those tests, unfortunately, outside of the one that I told you that go to the lab, are very inaccurate. So testing is a problem. We should honestly, in US, we should have already had, months into this, we should have accurate tests where you have them at home and you can test and know. But we're not there yet.
Okay, thank you. I have one piece of information from one of our attendees who actually works for the city. Tanaz Golshan works for Mayor Garcetti. She says the city and county sites are now back to providing results within 1 or 2 days. So that is good news. I know Dodger Stadium is a massive testing site for free. So thank you, Tanaz and Mayor Garcetti, for making that happen. Quick question, Dr. Emrani, is severe asthma and or reduced lung function considered a risk factor for COVID-19?
Asthma is not. When you say severe, anything severe is, but most often the question that I get is asthma a risk factor? Most asthmas where you don't have to take prednisone on a regular basis and you don't have to take inhalers on an everyday basis, but you use the rescue is not an increased risk. If you have to take shots for asthma and you have to take prednisone, that puts you at a mildly increased risk.
Okay, excellent. And schooling, views on whether schools should be open, and anyone want to jump in and share their thoughts on that, whether if they have any new ideas on that. There's a lot of questions about whether schools should open. Is it realistic for kids to wear masks all day long? Any thoughts on that? Maybe Dr. Michlin, some thoughts from a.
I'm mother of 2 teachers and grandmother of 5 school-age children. The reality is that I don't know if you can have a 6-year-old keep a mask on their face all day long, or an 8-year-old, and to be able to maintain distancing and to be able to, even if they have 12 students, there is no question that school is better than home and than Zooming. But the question is that, is their health and the health of the janitor in the building and the lunch lady and the security guard and the school teacher and everybody else, is the evaluation of the 2 is a very difficult one to decide whether it's a health issue more important or educational issue. And I think it depends on how capable and how much resources the school has in creating the safety. If the school could be safe, school is better. But if school is not safe, then what decision would you make as a parent? If you're not sure that your child is safe by going to school or bringing what they bring home to you or to your parents, how do you make that decision? I don't have an answer, but I know that if I have a child and I'm worried about their health, I would rather they be behind in school and socially isolated than to be sick and have for a disease that we don't know what long-term effect it has. I don't know if I answered your question.
The best that you could. I think the best that anyone could. And let's start, Rabbi Wolpe or Dr. Emrani have additional thoughts on that. I'm going to ask all of you a final question. Hopefully we can end on a positive note as to your primary silver lining, or one thing that you will miss about this pandemic. I'm going to ask you to share one silver lining with us. Before I do, I do want to thank everyone for joining us. And on behalf of the Iranian American Jewish Federation, I wanted to build off of what Rabbi Wolpe said, which is if we want these community organizations that we care about, that have been helping us for 40 years, to be around post-COVID, we need to invest in them. So I encourage you all to go to IAJF.org and invest in the Iranian Jewish Federation tonight. They do incredible work, especially their emergency grants program led by Yebri Esq. So I encourage you to visit
Emergency fund.
the emergency fund, which provides grants.
Social Services Committee.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Michlin. Okay, so I'm going to start with Dr. Emrani, a silver lining for all of us.
So I'll give you 2 because I want to answer the school question also, because I think it's an important one and I get this asked all the time. I think the primary issue is not children, is who the children come into contact with. In the entire time that we've had COVID, fewer than 80 children across the United States have died of COVID. 500 or more children die annually of the flu. So it's important that we keep these things in perspective, and that the heart condition that people were talking about also happens with the flu. So I don't think that we need to protect the children. I think that we need to figure out how to protect the adults, teachers, parents, all those kind of things. So I think there's a silver lining in that children are pretty safe. What I would say in terms of my overall silver lining is that there are times in life where we go through a period of difficulty, and I think that difficulty brings out creativity and brings out phenomenal memories. We went through this with the Iranian Revolution, And there are, to this day, we sit back and we talk fondly about many of the memories that we had during those difficult times. I think that there will be times in the future where we will look back fondly at how we stayed at home and created games and created special memories together during this difficult time also. And I think that we will look back fondly at some of the de-stressing parts of this, such as walking together in the community, such as talking to people who we used to text with, but now we actually pick up the phone and talk to them. Those kind of things will be remembered fondly.
Beautiful, thank you. Dr. Michlin.
I make it very quick. I think one of the silver lining is that we are finding out as adults that we can be ourselves, and we are living for our families and for ourselves and who we are, which and is not influenced so much by the larger community. And more importantly, I think that parents and children are having a lot more time with their quality time with their parents. And that is a very important part, especially in today's world, that parents were running all the time and now they have to stop and look at their children and look at themselves and take a deep breath.
Wonderful, thank you. And the final word to Rabbi Wolpe.
The first thing I would say is that the Jewish people, one of the things that makes us unique is that we are a universal people, by which I mean Jews have lived in every country of the world. We've been all over the world. And when Jews would meet from different countries, one of the things they would know is we share a common experience because we're Jews. Mm-hmm. This is the first time in human history that the entire world has gone through something, and everyone in the world knows that the entire world is going through something. Even if there were worldwide pandemics in the past, most people didn't know that they were worldwide because they lived in small villages. So in a way, this ties all of us together. 10 years from now, if you meet someone who comes from Paraguay, you'll be able to say to them, what was it like in the time of COVID? You share an experience and a universality that is really remarkable. And that will be the story. Look, our children will tell their grandchildren one day what it was like to grow up in COVID times. That's a silver lining. And the other is one day the masks will come off and we will rediscover again how beautiful it is to look into each other's faces. That's where the image of God is in this world. It's in every human face. And how wonderful it will be when we don't have to put a mask over them anymore.
Beautiful. What a wonderful ending. As the kids say, that's a mic drop, Rabbi Wolpe. Thank you. So this is a wonderful program. I want to thank Dr. Emrani, Dr. Michlin, Rabbi Wolpe for this incredible program, and of course, the Iranian American Jewish Federation for convening us. Please visit their website. And to everyone, thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.